Are we rolling?
Yeah.
All right. Do you remember the first time we fished?
Yeah, I remember the first time we fished.
And let me tell you, we get to the dock, and I think Nikki kind of knew who you were and all the great stuff you were doing down there, and obviously we like to fish, whether it be with a fly or with a mullet or with plugs. We get to the dock. I saw your boat, and I described it later, actually earlier to Nikki. It was like a trash can with a prop. and your gas tank in the back was like an oversized water bottle with some fuel in it, and your bait wheel was overflowing. We had finger mullets swimming in the bottom of the boat back by the transom.
Yeah.
I'm going like, what the hell is this? But obviously we had not only a great time, but you are a fishing fool.
I try. But the old skiff,
would you really call it a skiff?
yeah, call it the old skiff. I've had that thing almost 20 years now.
What was it? What kind of boat was it?
It's called a maritime skiff. I saw some lobster fishermen up in Massachusetts coming through an inlet, Situate Harbor, and they got the crazy tides and the rocks and everything, but they're stacked the lobster pots on this thing like 10 high, and he's rolling through the inlet, through the surf and everything, and I'm watching it, and I'm like, man, I could load up like 4 big dudes in that, plus have my bait in that, and roll through, Government Cut and Port Everglades and deal with the boat waves and everything that we deal with. So I bought one, never been in one. And the guy that I bought it from actually ran the company up in Massachusetts, was such an asshole. Oh, he was the worst.
In what way?
Well, there was no dealers. I think they had some dealers up in Maine and Massachusetts, maybe New Jersey. But being from Florida, there was no dealer. So I called him directly, which seemed like it irritated him. So he says, well, we have a dealer network. I says, well, I'm in South Florida. I said, you don't have a dealer down here. So I called you. He says, well, you're not going to get a discount. I said, dude, I didn't ask for a discount.
I want a boat.
Right. I said, I just need the boat being made. So he's like, well, I guess I'll make you one, but you're going to have to buy it through the guy closest to you. I said, well, where's that? And then he looked it up, and there was somebody like by the Chesapeake or whatever that was a dealer. And I actually had to pay the dealer and then drive to Massachusetts to get the boat from the shop. And I'm not sure why I stuck with that, but 20 years later, I'm glad I did, because I love that skiff.
Yeah, it's a great boat.
You still have it?
Yeah, still have it on my third engine.
Is there a name for it? Do you have a name for it?
No.
The cork?
It's funny because I took Carl Ball out in the skiff, and he goes, "Oh, so this is the pig pen." And I think
it's not a skiff.
And I think that's what you called it. And I says, I should name the boat the pig pen.
Big pen.
But it's cool because
it's effective.
It works, and I run that thing with the 6-gallon tank. At the end,
it's a 6-gallon water bottle.
Well, at the end of every trip, that
easy.
At the end of every trip, that thing's empty. And the biggest issues people have, is their fuel. When you have engine issues, 9 out of 10 times it's because you got fuel issues. So these bigger tanks that are under the decks and stuff get the crap in it, and you need like 3 filters, and then your filters friggin' don't work, and so on and so forth. But anyway, at the end of the day,
the madness works.
Right. So anyway, we keep it simple over there in Fort Lauderdale. At least I do. I might be the only one.
I love it. It's funny because the bow looks kind of like a panga,
right?
And it's not a skiff, but
you can call it a skiff.
It's a mullet fishing machine.
Yeah.
I love it.
Well, I think it's a skiff. Maybe it's not like a poling skiff,
but it's a skiff.
It's a skiff. I mean, seriously, no bilge pump. No inner deck.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, I remember that.
So, and then if your bait well does, take a shit on you, then, the fish live right in the back of the boat anyway. So
that's
we're good.
What I saw. What, tell me about your fishing experience. I mean, obviously you have fished offshore a fair amount.
Mm-hmm.
When did the first inclination come to you, like, I want to be a fisherman? What was your early years like? What did you do? How did fishing come into play?
Yeah, well, see, my dad was big into, the offshore scene. As a matter of fact, the first thing that my father ever fished for were the bluefin tuna up in Massachusetts, and that was in the early 70s. And he really got addicted to the fishing. And then the winter would come, and then he couldn't fish, so he moved to Fort Lauderdale so he could constantly fish. So I kind of was just always next to him. And then he built some boats for himself, just to fish, that ended up being really nice boats. And he fell into being a custom boat builder because of that. And then very shortly after that, he got very friendly with a bunch of Venezuelan dudes. And they asked him to fish on the International ILTA team with him. So my dad went all over the world fishing blue marlin and white marlin. And I was pretty young at the time. This is in the mid 80s. So I'm like, 13, 14 years old. And that's when I learned that, you could actually make money fishing. But I kind of took the opposite approach shortly after that. Is I went to college, and I got out of college, and I figured, well, I need to go out there and make a few $1,000,000 so I can buy a sport fish boat and travel around the Caribbean and do the fishing like my old man and his buddies did. And I don't know, got out of school and worked real hard and made a few bucks, but I realized that I probably wasn't going to get there financially. And so I worked on big boats, part-time as a mate, mostly marlin tournaments and sailfish tournaments. But when it was rough, guys wanted me to take them snook and tarpon fishing. A lot of older guys had a lot of dough, and they'd come down to do the offshore thing, and the weather would be totally horrible. And I would be like, well, you can go and catch a nice tarpon if you like. And I started doing that, and then that worked out pretty good with work, so I could do that on a part-time basis. So when I first started working, I was guiding part-time and started working. And I don't know, kind of did that for about 15 years or so. And then we went through that real bad recession. And I was making money selling boats and brokering boats. And anybody that's been in the boat industry for a long time realize there's some peaks and there's some pretty bad valleys. Well, during the valleys, the brokerage and the boat sales really dried up. But the phone kept ringing for me to take people tarpon fishing and snook fishing. So that started paying the bills. And as the economy got better, the business got better. And I was like, well, why fight the tide? If people are putting money in my hand to take them fishing, maybe I should just fish. And then going about 17 years now, I've been full time. And that's kind of the way it all fell together.
And if you take a look at it, I mean, that offshore game is really expensive.
It's expensive, and the numbers are small now.
Right.
Like when I was doing it, the Calcuttas were huge, the prizes were huge. There'd be 30, 40, 50 boats in a tournament. And then now, if you look at the Bahama Billfish tournament or chain, if they even do it anymore, some years they don't even do it. And there'll be like 12 boats in the Billfish Championship.
Is that because the fishing is so poor, or because people don't want to do that anymore? I mean, is the passion for the tournament starting to?
Well, I think what it is. I think years ago there used to be what I would refer to as your $1 million fisherman. Your $1 million fisherman could afford a nice boat, call it a 45 hat or something like that, and he could afford to go to the Bahamas and fish a boat like that. I think those guys are gone, and the new guy has a $10 million boat. Or if you're at entry level, say you got a Viking, then you're only into it for $3 or $4 million, but it's costing you, close to $1 million a year to run it. So I think because of that, they basically, there's no more middleman anymore. Either you're loaded or you're running around in a T-top style boat. And when I mean loaded, I mean, $10 million sport fish.
Right.
It's very common now. And I think a lot of those owners and stuff really could care less about the fishing. They weren't into it. They weren't living for it like the guys were in the 80s and the 90s.
Right.
It makes sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. We just did a podcast with Skip Smith, and we're going to fish with him. We're leaving for Capos tomorrow, and he ran the Mother and the Mother and Her Hooker, the book.
Did you read that book?
I didn't read the book.
Oh,
I should read it.
It's your kind of book.
Okay.
I mean, it's really. I didn't leave the house for like 3 days. I was riveted.
Really?
Riveted. And I've done, as has Nikki, some offshore stuff, but we get seasick, right? I mean, we are horrible. And we tried. We had a twin V, and we were trying to go offshore and catch a sailfish. And initially, we'd buy a dozen goggle eye, and then we'd go out there and get seasick and come home, and we'd look at the watch and say, well, if we leave right now, we could go golfing in an hour and a half, and we'd go out and drown one goggle eye and run home.
And we'd release all the others at the dock.
At the dock.
That's the safest goggle eye, is the goggle eye in our live well.
Yeah.
We are not offshore guys.
Yeah.
We suck.
So, but, I can see how, too, that with what you've done in your career, I see a great fisherman, a great character with great levity, and your home, you fish near home, you're home at night. That offshore stuff is very enduring. It's big, big money. You travel, you're elsewhere. And I can see, as a fisherman myself, how we rent a house in the Keys for 6 weeks, and we pull the boat in shallow water, and it's really cool to go home every night, but not really have that big exposure offshore. But we are going to go to Cabos tomorrow and give it one last shot. But what you've done there in Fort Lauderdale is really amazing, and I don't think many people realize how great the fishery is between Miami and Fort Lauderdale. Tell us about your fishery.
Yeah, especially with tarpon, and I know you love tarpon. That's your gig, but it's the only place that I know of that you can fish for tarpon in one form, fashion, or the other, and I mean get tarpon 12 months out of the year, all the time. Yeah, you may have to switch up how you do it in the size of the fish you're catching and where you're getting them, but we always got them. We have them all summer long, we have them all winter long, and the rest of the state is cold, and the tarpon flood into Broward and Dade County, so we have them there.
And that's because of the deep cuts, the bridges.
The water's deeper, and then the Gulf Stream makes it where if the water temperatures ever do dip into the 70s, it only lasts for a day or so, and then the ocean water is 74, 75 degrees, and it warms it right back up. So we don't have any real long periods of cold water, so the fish will stick in there. And it's very good. It's getting more challenging as years go on. I think it's always been a little challenging for a lot of people to fish in, especially Broward County. But I think a lot like the way Kelly Slater turned into a great surfer. He surfed out of Sebastian Inlet,
Right.
which had a lot of waves, but you really had to.
They weren't quality waves.
Right, and you had to work hard to get every last bit out of your beach. But now I have to get every last bit out of my fishery. So having that demanding pressure on you all the time, and not pressure from clients, pressure from your fishing environment to be able to stay on the fish and know where they are, know where you're going to be able to catch them. I think it raises the bar. Guys that fish out of like Island Rod or Key West, or of course some of these international places, I don't think they realize how great their fishery is. So they kind of don't have to, let's say,
They take it for granted.
Take it for granted. They don't have to push it quite as hard. You know what I mean? So
you're saying you have little nooks and crannies and little hot spots that if you're a good fisherman and you're a fishy guy, it's hard to just go into Tarpon River or Broward and just kind of be consistent on fish. There's little nuts, right?
yeah.
So you're saying that you gotta pick and choose. And
I'm just saying that it's not a normal fishery where you have charts and instructions
Right.
on how you can, where you can go and how you can do it. And we don't have like this huge amount of guides, where it can be monkey see, monkey do,
Right.
or somebody's gonna teach
share information.
right, share or teach you stuff, or even be much of a mentor. Like Mark Croca.
I was just going to ask you about your mentor, and I knew Croca had fished there a lot. He and John Glorio.
Right. And the reason I mentioned Croca's name is because when I was really young, he was fishing Fort Lauderdale, and he was doing a lot of the style fishing that I'm doing, and I would see him, and not that he taught me much, but it made me realize that I can do it right here, and I can be great at it if I work hard at it.
Because he was great at it.
Absolutely.
And he was very successful.
Absolutely.
Now you just had to figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people take you as a very light-hearted person because you are really generous with your with your hospitality as far as fun
And the
and
comedy.
your charisma and your people forget that being a guide is an entertainment business. How seriously do you take yourself as a fisherman?
Seriously, to take myself.
Yeah.
Very
Are you driven? Do you have sleepless nights?
Yeah, I'm driven to have sleepless nights. You fish a lot. When I get kicked in the balls, and if you're a fisherman, that constantly happens to you. You can take it two ways. You can fall down and hold your balls, right? Or you can get up and get ready for another one. And I firmly believe that if you don't get up and get ready for another one of these days you'll just stay down. So I constantly believe that, you have to get up and brush yourself off, start over again. And when that happens to you, it's kind of like working out. The more you do that, the more consecutively you do that, the better you become. And that's kind of been my philosophy. Every time I think that I'm really good, something happens where it humbles me and I know that I'm not that good. And when I quit thinking that way, that's probably when I'll level off and won't progress like I used to.
But most likely you're not going to allow that to happen.
I don't know. I'm getting older. Shit changes.
But
So far it hasn't.
right.
And
it's interesting. I'm almost 70 now. In a couple of years I will be, but I seriously, tournaments aside, I take it very personal. And it sometimes I wake up and I'll be dragging my head around. I feel like insecure. I'm not a good person. What's this bad karma I have? And Nikki and I go through these wars and we take it very, very personal. And I imagine that you too assess how good we are by each and every day.
Yeah. The only people that really know how it affects me
Are your wife and your dog.
Exactly. Because I get home late at night. Those are the only two that see me when I'm at my lows or see me when I'm at my highs. You know what I mean? Then I go to sleep and I get ready for the next day and I don't have time to think about what happened yesterday because I got a new guy getting on the boat today and I'm going to make sure that if I got beat up yesterday, that this guy wasn't going to get beat up today. But I don't know, that nighttime thing and getting home, not too many people get to see that side of it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Doing what you do, so our fishery and how we fish typically, the fish are swimming pretty regularly in May down in the Keys. So we get on the beach and we know where they're going to be or they either come or they don't. You run around a little bit. But what you do, you have deeper water. Mm-hmm. They move around a little bit more. They're harder to find. What is your tactic going from day to day when you can't find them? How do you put the pieces of the puzzle together?
Yeah, good question. The well, my old saying, "Can you get a dozen?" Right.
Right. I love that.
Yeah, that's pretty deep. People laugh and they use it or whatever. But the very first thing in order to be successful in Broward County is you have to be able to get a dozen of the right baits. I use mullet a lot. I'm not afraid to tell people that. Good luck catching them. But when you have mullet in your well and you're trolling mullet around and realizing our fishery, it's a lot less visual. The water's dark. You can't see the fish so much. Your sonars and side scans and all that can only do so much. But a mullet will help you find the fish. And also when you're mullet fishing is you can keep your baits in the water while you're moving. So even if the fish aren't eating, if you have a mullet in the water and the mullet starts getting really nervous, he's not getting nervous for nothing.
Right.
So you can kind of put that and get a little leverage from that.
It's probably a CUDA.
Could be. Could be jack. It could be a lot of things. But that helps you,
Right.
That's like having a whole nother set of eyes. It's like having another type of piece of equipment on your boat that, instead of using your sonar, you're using your bait. And it really helps you a lot. And, that old saying about getting a dozen, there's a lot to it. And that's part of it.
And when you're fishing mullet, you're covering ground.
Exactly.
You're not anchored. You're not set up in one spot. You're covering ground. Essentially, you're almost like like you said, it's tannic water, can't see the bites, hard to see the fish. Ray Marine can only work, or the depth finder can only work so well. You're kind of fishing the structure, fishing the bottom, fishing everything but the fish.
Right.
Realistically.
And that's something that a lot of my clients have a hard time with because of Fort Lauderdale. You're not fishing the sides of the creeks and stuff.
Right.
The docks and all that kind of thing. You're fishing holes and ledges and places where the current will split. And you can't see that stuff through any type of, tree or mangrove line or shadow. So people constantly want to, get a plug and try to cast under docks and stuff. And I'll let them do it. Knock yourself out. But in the meantime, I have the 2 mullet behind the boat do the work for us.
You're watching hog leg back there.
Sure. It's all about the hog leg.
So, okay, what's a hog leg?
Yeah, the old hog leg. Hog leg is when you're fishing a mullet is basically over 10 inches, between 10 and say 20 inches. A bait that's, close to somewhere between, I don't know, a pound to 2.5 pounds.
Is that the golden mullet? A hog leg?
Yeah. Well... Yeah,
I mean, I'm saying,
yeah, it is.
I'm just wondering because as a bait guy, we fish with mullet, and I've always, thought maybe a little bit of a smaller one might be a little bit more, dinosaurs or elephants eat peanuts.
Right.
I've always thought that like the finger mullet a lot of times might work a little bit better, and the real big mullet, but you're the mullet man. You're the Lunker Dog.
Well, the Lunker Dog says that the hog leg is the way to go, but realize where the vintage came from. I mean, unlike some of the other places where you snook fish, in Broward County, it was never about the numbers of snook. It was about how big your snook could be. So we grew up with the mindset of we're only looking for the biggest snook in the creek.
And what would be a big snook?
40? That's monster.
40's monster.
40 pounds?
No, 40 inch.
40 inches. So how heavy is that? 20 pounds?
All right, the 40-inch thing, that's for West Coast people.
Oh, it is?
In my opinion.
So, Nikki, you're a West Coast guy.
Jeez.
You're
wear my hat
WC.
sideways.
Take off that U.S. ski team patch.
I honestly
You're
think...
no longer worthy.
Poser.
I honestly think that the people from Sebastian Inlet to, say, Port Everglades, measuring the snook... It's kind of beneath me. I'm way more into we talk about 40 pounds.
40 pounds.
Right.
Yeah.
30 pounds.
You're a weight fish guy.
Well, and like I say, it was always about getting the biggest snook in the creek. And we would call it basically a lunker snook, a fish over 20 pounds.
So, but big meaning weight, not length.
Right.
Right. Because the trout guys, they're all in inches.
Yeah.
Right. And then, you see these West Coast snook that, are friggin' 44 inches, 45 inches long, but they weigh 18 pounds, and then a 44-inch snook in Fort Lauderdale, is weighing 35 pounds. So it's, that's that whole inch thing. That drives me crazy.
So, okay, I got it. All right.
Okay, WC.
And it irritates the piss out of the West Coasters, which, is like not a bad thing.
And you kind of like turning that screw too.
Well, yeah. I mean, dude, I look at everybody as if they were a fishing buddy of mine. And if you fish with me, then we have fun and I goof around and I'll pick on you a little bit. And if you don't like that, go fish with somebody else.
Right.
So, that's just kind of the way we are. And I got to tell you, you lose people that way. There's some people that can't handle that. But the people that do handle that and can handle that, they love you for it.
They want to come back.
Sure. Right. And then they give it right back to you.
For sure.
They'll go out there and Punta Gorda or whatever and catch 20 snook and be like, how many did you catch this month?
Right.
You know what I mean? And I get it. And it's fun and it's good to go back and forth.
That's why you're so loved.
Is there actually any animosity between the West Coast and the East Coast guides?
Yeah, a little.
Is there?
A little.
Based on inches?
Based on inches, exactly. There's a little animosity, and there's a lot of animosity between there's a lot more animosity between the guys that aren't digital and the guys that are.
Right, I see that. Yeah.
Guys that aren't digital really have a hard time with guys that are digital, and you know what I mean by digital. I mean that you do social media and you take pictures with your phone and you have Facebook and you have Instagram.
Yeah, that went
YouTube.
right over my head.
Yeah, so being digital irritates the piss out of people, especially the older people that aren't digital, and I get it, but guys like Bouncer Smith that have been around forever, they're not as digital, and they were used to the old TV and magazines and that kind of thing.
The rabbit ears.
Right. And then this wave, this digital wave comes on, and they're sitting from the outside looking in, and they're like, how did this happen? And, I get it. It's not easy to swallow.
And you took full advantage of that digital swing. I mean, talk about when YouTube came about, you were truly one of the first fishermen that really took full advantage of uploading content, uploading videos, and you got millions of views from that.
Yeah, I was lucky. I was lucky as far as that went because of you guys both met Lamont. And Chip was really, into filmmaking at the time. There was no real digital video at the time. It was film. And if you look at the early videos, we were actually shooting that in Super 8. And we would convert to Super 8 so we could watch it on VHS. So we were doing that, and it was pretty hard. And then Lamont calls me one day, and he's like, dude, there's this website called YouTube. This is before Google bought YouTube. He says, we can upload our videos right on YouTube, and then they can host them there. And I'm listening, and I'm trying to put it all together. I had no clue what he was talking about. So I'm like, are we filming today? And he's like, yeah. So then he'd go home, and he'd be like, dude, I uploaded it. So I would go on my computer, and I would go to YouTube, and I would try to, watch the video, and nothing would happen because I had an old computer. The processor wasn't even good enough to do video. And it would take like 2 days to upload a 5-minute video.
Wow.
Yeah, because we were on dial-up. There wasn't even high-speed internet at the time. And then you would just pray that your hard drive wouldn't crash during the upload, because it took everything your processor could do to upload video. And that's how early we were in. More important than the actual production was the way the YouTube search engines worked in the old days. Like, the only way you found the Lunker Dog through YouTube in the early days is you had to type in tarpon fishing, snook fishing, fishing in Fort Lauderdale. And then if you typed that in, you would see the Lunker Dog. So not only were we starting to get a lot of views, they were the right people watching the content, which you can't say for digital media anymore.
Right.
Now it's just an algorithm mess. Whoever gets the most views are going to get pushed to the front. And it's a better business model for Google and these guys. I get it. But we really were able to take advantage of the time and the timing of the digital media.
Right. So, but from the beginning, what was your objective on these videos? Just to film? You kind of wanted to go the unconventional way of what was on TV, correct?
Absolutely. The thing that always irritated the piss out of me and Lamont and a lot of the guys that I fish with is these guys that were on TV and these guys that were writing in the magazines would come to us so they could catch the fish, and then they could write about it and be the expert.
They would be the expert.
Don't say that this is where the real guys came in, because this makes sense.
This is all about being a real guy.
Is that right?
Yeah, so the real guys would actually take the Sosons of the world, and they would go out and do their show or whatever, or do, write an article. But they couldn't actually go into the New River and catch the tarpon.
Right.
They weren't the ones getting the 30-pound snooks. But then they would use the real guy. And the old shows, you saw it.
Right.
Do you remember Andy Thompson taking Mark Sosin fishing all the time? Andy was a superstar.
Right.
He would put that old man on all these fish, and he would make these shows, and the shows would come out. And then Sosin was arrogant enough to basically talk down to Andy. And Lamont and I'd be sitting there watching this show and be like, oh my God, I can't believe that's happening.
Right.
Really?
Yes. No. Absolutely. It's pretty well known.
Yeah. from
the inside world.
Yeah. And I've always been in the inside world because of my dad and the boat building and all that.
Well, what was really important is when I had a fishing show for those 7 years. I think you used to see it a long time ago.
Yeah, I used to watch it.
I was always trying. I'd go out of my way. I always paid the guys full price, and I always made the guide the celebrity. And I always wanted to be the neophyte on their boat, even though I could fish whether it be with whomever. I knew how to fish, but I really wanted to let that guy shine. I want his information on the air.
Right.
And I think that was really important to basically be humble with what my role was as a host, but really to expose where the real knowledge was coming from. And I wanted to hear the nuances from the guide, because if that information is transferred to a host and he tries to explain what the expertise is, he's going to miss the nuances of why you do whatever you do and the techniques and the tactics.
Right.
So if that guide is profiled as, if we fish with you, you are the king and you are the Mac Daddy and all that stuff, actually, there's no medium, so the information is direct.
Yeah. Yeah. And there was a part of doing the YouTube videos that was so gratifying, and that part was when I would see Andy Thompson down in Biscayne Bay fishing, and he looks over at me and I look over at him. Never met before, didn't really know each other, but because of YouTube, Andy was like, "Oh, that's Jeff. He's like me,
a real guy."
Yeah, and then I'd give him the thumbs up and give him a wave, and never really had to say anything, and we were friends.
Right.
And we both respected one another and and then guys like yourself were starting to call me up to fish. And I'll never forget the day you called me. I'll never forget the day Bill Dance called me, where I hang up the phone and I'm like, Andy Mill wants to fish with me, and I followed, the fishing that you did in your shows. And I was always like, to me, you were like my Bill Dance, because I grew up in South Florida and I gave two shits about catching bass, but I loved catching tarpon. So I'm thinking, this guy really wants to fish with me. And then we go fishing and then we have a great time. And then I'm like, well, why the hell not? Wouldn't he want to fish with me?
Right.
But it was a big turnaround in my life, because you always were on the outside looking in, and then all of a sudden you're on the inside and people are looking at you. And you can really, show everybody the fruits of all the work that you've been putting in.
When did you realize that you were one of the greats? Was there a place in time or a moment that you realized that, you know what, I'm really fucking good?
Yeah, when I was freaking putting those 30-pound lunkers in everybody's faces day in and day out, and I'm waiting for a little bit of, response. I want to see the other guys, and then that wasn't happening. And I'm like, damn, it's like I'm pretty damn good at this. And then taking a guy like you fishing's easy. You know what I mean? You know how you can freaking work your rod, you can freaking see what's going on behind the boat, you understand, what the water looks like when the fish starts to come up and that kind of thing. But taking a guy that doesn't know anything, like Bill Dance, and being able to put multiple fish, on his rod and coach him. And when you start coaching people, that's when you realize that you're an expert. Because some of the people that you swear are the biggest professionals in the world are now listening to you, every little thing that you say. And if they do it exactly the way you say, and they execute exactly the way that you want them to, they become successful. And when you see somebody else become successful, that's when you know that you're good. At least that's the way I look at it.
Yeah.
It's obvious.
Yeah. And when you first started making these YouTube channels or videos,
yeah,
were you Jeff Maggio or were you Lunker Dog?
And how did that name come about?
Well, it was the Lunker Dog when we were doing the videos.
From day one?
From day one.
And how'd that come about? Who termed that or coined that?
Well, I had a bar on Fort Lauderdale Beach in the old days. And I mean the old days. I mean 1996 to like 2001. And I had this kid that worked for me. And he would check the IDs at the front of the bar, at the entrance. And there was a little patio that was right in front of Shooters. And I would get done with my trip, and it'd be like 10:30 at night. And back then, you'd kill the biggest snook that you caught and throw them in the back of the truck. There was no regulations and that kind of thing. And killing small snook wasn't what you did. You killed the big ones. We didn't know that those were the breeders at the time, where it made a difference. So anyway, I'd have the big giant snook in the back of the truck, and Jeff, this big black kid that worked for me, would call them lunkers. And the tourists would be on the front porch of the bar, and I'd walk up, and they'd go, "Oh, what kind of fish is that? What kind of fish is that?" And Jeff would look over, and he'd say, "Oh, those are lunkers, dog. Those are lunkers." So when guys would come into the bar, we would start laughing and goofing around, and we'd say that, "Oh yeah, those are lunkers, dog." So then, when I started doing more trips and the business got a little bit more serious, I had to name it something. So we called it Lunker Dog, and it was kind of a joke at the beginning, but it was easy for people to say. People remembered it. People liked saying it, so we stuck with it. And then when YouTube came out, I was the Lunker Dog. And it's funny, I'll introduce myself to people. "Hey, how you doing? I'm Jeff." They go, "How do I know you?" And I'll go like this, "The Lunker Dog." And they're like, "Oh, yeah." So, and it also had to do with, there was a time in my business where I said, do I want to spend time and energy on advertising, or do I want to spend time and energy on branding? And I was very familiar with marketing. And I said, well, advertising runs out as soon as your cash runs out. Branding might take a little bit longer, but once you've developed a brand and you've instilled it upon somebody, they'll remember you forever. So I took the long-term approach, and I went out and I started branding myself as opposed to spending money on advertising to get trips.
And growing it organically.
Correct.
And how did you brand that initially?
Well, it was mostly through digital media.
But it was a character.
Yeah, it's a character.
It's a character, right?
It's a character. And that was the other thing, too. You asked me how serious I take myself. When we started doing our YouTube productions, the one thing that we did not want to do was to let other people think that we took ourselves seriously. We did not want to be the guy that was telling you how to do things or why to do things, or I'm an expert, so you should do this. What we wanted to do is we wanted to laugh, and we wanted to cut up, and we wanted to say things that you and Nikki would say with your buddies when you're out fishing. And then we wanted to act like that because that's the way people acted when they're actually fishing. They did not act like they were on friggin' some TV show.
Right, it was authentic.
Right. And we were able to do that for free. It didn't cost us, $10,000 to make 10 minutes. So we could do whatever we want. We could upload whatever we want. We could act however we wanted. And we couldn't spend that kind of time getting good at fishing if we weren't laughing and goofing around and having a good time.
Right.
So we thought that was the best way.
It went hand in hand.
Yeah, we just thought that was the best way. And it was different at the time. Now YouTube and digital media, people do it all the time. Everybody's a character now. But when we did it, there was no characters. You know what I mean?
Right. That's why it was so popular. It was fresh and new, and
it was something that people hadn't seen before.
Right.
And then we would laugh about it, and then next thing you know, there'd be a 50-pound fish next to the boat. And then people would look like, dude, these guys are just cutting up, and that's the third one he just caught.
They're real.
Right. So, we didn't have to scream into the top of our lungs that we were great or anything. All we had to do was have fun and catch fish and just keep uploading.
Let the stories
tell
the story.
And let it happen. And then people that were into the sport gravitated towards the Lunker Dog. And then they meet me and they're like, oh, yeah, I kind of get it. This kid really doesn't give a shit.
Has Jeff Maggio kind of gone away in the fishing world? Is Lunker Dog more prevalent in your life now than Jeff?
No, and that's because of my clients. My clients find me as the Lunker Dog, and then they fish with me, and then they know me as Jeff.
No way.
Yeah.
I only know you as Lunker. I'm not ever calling you Jeff again.
But it's true. It's true that you can hook them by being a Lunker Dog, but then when you fish with somebody over and over again, they get to know you, and then they know they see through what originally hooked them.
Right.
You know what I mean?
What's the most outrageous trip you've had? If you've got one that stands out.
Most outrageous? Probably when I did the Florida Sportsmanship with George Gods. Wind was blowing out of the northwest about 30 miles an hour, and cooled down to about 45 the day before we were supposed to do the shoot. And George called me up and he said, I guess we'll reschedule. And I said, well, we can reschedule. I says, but sometimes the fish really like this. I said, every once in a while it'll crush you. I says, but on the other hand, it could be really good. And I don't know, we shot that show in about 3.5 hours. We hooked about 18 fish. And I was a nervous wreck before the whole thing because, I told the people to come on down, and I knew damn well it could go either way. And because of that, I don't know, when I start catching fish, even today, I get excited. I have a great time doing it. And I was able to do that with George and the camera people and all that, and the fish cooperated and everything was perfect. And then later on watching the shows, you kind of just appreciated the whole experience because, like I said, there's times when you get kicked in the balls and there's time when you're King Kong out there.
Shine.
And we were King Kong that day.
Right.
So, and then I've never seen a fishing show with tarpon that was ever quite like that. I mean, literally, every spot we went to, you just put a bait in the water and we had a fish.
There's nothing like a tarpon bite with a mullet.
No.
I love that. I really, really love that. And a lot of people think that we're just fly guys. But how much fun have we had fishing with mullet over
so
there?
much fun.
I'll tell you an interesting story. Jose Waihabi, I don't know if you remember the show he did where he couldn't get the bait. I think he was probably west of Key West, and he grabbed the cooler. I think he might have been even out of the country.
I think he was in Panama. He was with Carter Andrews, I think.
Out of the country. So he gets out of the boat. He couldn't get shallow enough with his boat. So he gets the cooler out of his boat, wades up into the shallow area.
Yeah, I do remember that show.
Throws the cast net, fills up the cooler, wades it out to the boat, and they go crush him that day. Nikki and I are in the Lower Keys probably about 4 or 5 years ago. And it's nasty. Big black clouds, just blowing 20, a little bit of rain. And we're at Baby's Coffee, just south of the Sugarloaf Hotel there, getting a coffee. And driving over there, I look over to the west side, and there's a little basin. And I look over there, and I see this big half-acre of mullet, a big mullet mud. And I look at the sky, and I look at Nikki, and I know that there's no way we're going to be able to fly fish on that day. And I said, Nikki, today we are dedicating this day to Jose. He said, what do you mean? I said, Nikki, see that mullet mud over there? We're going to grab the cooler out of the Hell's Bay. We're going to walk out there. We're going to fill it with mullet, and we're going to go crush them. He said, really? So we grab the cooler, and we walk through the mangroves and get over there, and the mud's sucking the sandals off of our feet, and the coral. And I throw great bananas with my cast net.
Oh, my gosh.
So we're walking out there, and a sense of the coral's killing my feet. And we get out there, I got the cast net in my mouth, and I'm getting ready to throw it, and I'm right there. And just before I let go, Nikki goes, don't fuck it up. So I fling this banana out there, and we get a bunch of mullet, and we throw them in the cooler. We go back and put it in the boat and go down about another 4 miles and launch the boat. And we go out and we hook like seven or eight tarpon that day. But that was one of the greatest days of fishing I've ever had, because we're not great, catchers of mullet, but we love mullet fishing. And because of Jose's show and showing what he had done on his show, we saved that day, and it was dedicated to Jose. And seriously, to this day, it was one of the best days of my life.
Yeah, mullet fishing is phenomenal, just because it's so visual. You see the take, you see the mullet getting nervous before the take a lot of times. Sometimes the fish are in a weird mood where they hit the mullet 8 times before they actually suck it down. And caught a lot of tarpon other ways, but it's exciting. It's kind of like marlin fishing for the big blue marlin, but you don't have to wait friggin' 3 days for that son-bitch to come up in your spread.
Right.
It happens every few hours, on a slow day instead of every few days. So it's fun. And then the clients, once they see it, they're hooked.
Right.
Like totally hooked.
Yeah. No. Do you ever butterfly your mullet and throw them on the bottom?
Yeah. I actually tried that a little bit the night before last. There was a ton of fish, and we were only getting a few strikes with the live bait, and we do that. And sometimes it works pretty well. I tell you, it's funny, the dead bait thing. And I'll give you an example. Last year, there was just a ton of tarpon in this one spot they were fishing. It was kind of deep. And we were getting some with the live mullet, but there was just so many fish that I was like, let me cut some mullets in half and throw them on the bottom. And we couldn't keep a bait in the water. We were just crushing them. I think we got like 7 fish in, like 3 hours. And
were you chunking the bottom?
yeah, well, we take a few mullet and chum them up, and then throw out
throw out one with a hook on it.
Throw out one with a hook on it, and pretty much, they loved it, and we were crushing them. So, being the guide, I'm like thinking, okay, well, I got that in my back pocket. I can do that, anytime these fish kind of clam up on me. The very next day, I banked on that, and I didn't get a friggin' strike. Same fish, same spot. One day they couldn't wait to eat the dead bait, and the very next day I couldn't get a shot on it. But I'll tell you something. A client, whether he knows it or not, rather catch one tarpon on a live bait and watch him eat it and do all that than catch 4 tarpon on a dead bait.
Yeah.
Now they don't understand that until after it happens, but you know that after doing it so many thousands of times that it's worth them to see that.
Right.
And then if they do see that, they're hooked.
What's amazing is like the fall mullet run.
I was just about to say that. Because talking about mullet, I need a little clarification on definition here. What is happy bait?
Okay. Happy bait. Happy bait. Well, that's a good question because it's not just about the mullet, even though that the mullet is the most apparent thing that happens during happy bait. Happy bait itself is when all the dorks that can't normally catch bait can catch bait. Everybody's happy. It's happy bait. Guys that don't normally go out and get the bait, they're all out there. They got their cast nets. They're filling their nets when they're throwing their bananas and amoebas, and everybody's happy, and you see everybody. And they're fishing together. And spots aren't a big deal. And it's happy bait. But happy bait, of course, we get the mullet to come down, and that's what I'm into. But at the same time, the mullet are coming down. The ballyhoos are coming down offshore. And the goggle eyes are schooling up in their big numbers. And all this stuff usually happens in September and October. And that's just the bait migrations that normally move, as the water's cooling down. They come right down the Straits of Florida, and that's happy bait.
But happy bait is not, it's not a time, it's not a place. It's happy bait is when you call happy bait, correct?
It's true.
You got to call it.
I got to call it. I don't call happy bait until I see everybody out there. You guys have participated in happy bait. Right?
We've seen you out there.
Right?
Yes.
And when happy bait is going on, it's very apparent. I mean, you guys showed up, I don't know, a year or two after we went fishing and did the first Mullet Run stuff. And the inlet was just slap full of bait. And the tarpon were jumping all over the place. Not necessarily the best bite in the world.
Right.
But how many boats were out there that night?
I have never seen the inside so filled with tarpon in the air and mullet spraying.
Wall to wall.
I had a tarpon, or I should say, because we were together, a tarpon came up right next to the boat and filled our boat with 45, 50 happy baits.
Sprayed the mullet right in there. But I mean, that particular night that I saw you guys, I mean, there were literally 20 dudes in the inlet.
Right.
And you saw them.
Yeah.
They were legitimately happy. That was like the time of their life. This is the time to be out there. And they were doing it on the beach when we were in the inlet, Yeah. The other thing about happy bait is there was always so much bait, and it would go on for so many miles, up and down the beach, is everybody had their own little area to fish. There was no crowding.
They're all spread out.
Everybody's spread out. And then if you were on a bunch of fish and you saw a guy, you waved him over. You weren't worried about, your spot or a corner or whatever. That's happy bait.
Right. What is your key to being successful during the mullet run when there are so many fish in the water? I know what I do, which I think works pretty well, which might be similar to you, but what is your key to catching fish during the mullet run with a mullet?
Well, I think that there's a couple of little things that you can do consistently that'll increase your bites. Like not fishing your bait right in the middle of all the bait, trying to get it right on the outskirts of the bait. Because if you watch the fish, they kind of parallel the schools of bait, and then they go in and feed. Mm-hmm. And if you expect them to find your bait right in the middle of everything, not that they can't do it, not that it doesn't happen, but it doesn't happen every day. If you're able to keep your bait right on the side of the big schools, and you can tell which way the tarpon and the snook are pushing them, because they will push the bait. Sometimes they'll push it towards the shore, and then you see the bait really concentrate, and then the fish all come in for the kill, and then they eat all at once. If you can anticipate that and understand that that's happening, and you can put your bait in the right spot, then that helps you. Then there's other days when no matter what you do, you can't pull a strike out of there, and that can happen to anybody with as much experience as ever. And then there's other days where you can throw your bait right in the middle of everything, and for whatever reason, those tarpon find it and eat it, and you're just pulling strikes out. Also, I'm not afraid to leave the fish during happy bait. For instance, if we're fishing a school and it's out in the middle of the inlet and we're in 40 feet of water, and we're just not getting the strikes, we're seeing the fish and we're not getting the strikes, I'll leave them, and I'll go down the beach a quarter mile.
Find new bait.
Find a different pot of fish. And in my opinion, tarpon have a lot of different moods, I call it. And one batch of tarpon may be in a totally different mood than a batch of tarpon that's just 100 yards away. So I got no problem picking up that time of year and leaving fish to find fish, even though people say, oh, you're not supposed to leave fish to find fish. Fortunately, during happy bait, you never really leave them. You just change.
Yeah, you know you're going to find another school.
Right.
I've always slow trolled or drifted on the outside of a school. Like keep that one or two bait maybe 20, 30 yards away on the outer edge and troll the outer edges like what you were talking about. But have you ever slapped a mullet on the floor of your boat and like stun it? And you know how those tarpon get in there, start sliding on their sides, flip that stunned mullet out in front of that sliding fish.
Well, we used to cut the tail.
We used to cut the tail too, so they couldn't swim very fast. So when they'd come through, our bait was the slowest one, and that would be the left dog standing.
Did it work?
Sometimes it does, yeah, not very consistently.
Well, it's kind of like a lot of the theories in that happy bait run.
Right.
I mean, the key to happy bait is you go and you try anything that you have to try if you're not getting the strikes.
How about a dead bait on the bottom during that?
Dead bait on the bottom. I've had very good luck doing that and catching big snook. Not so much with the tarpon, but the big snooks are down there, and they're right on the sand in the bottom, and they're fat and happy. And to get them to use any energy to come up and grab a bait that you're either trolling or that's swimming or whatever, not so much. I've actually seen the big snooks sitting in the sand underneath the bait, and I've had jacks come in and smash your bait up, and then the bait fall on the bottom, and then you catch a snook.
Interesting.
Yeah. But at the big snooks, a lot of days they respond really well to a dead bait right on the bottom of all that bait, and they'll just swim over and suck it down.
I'm guessing the best time to fish might be right before and right after happy bait. Correct me if I'm wrong, but like in the Keys, the worm hatch, the Pallola worm hatch, sometimes there's too many worms when the hatch goes off, and the fish will never find your fly.
Yeah.
There's thousands and thousands of worms. So right before the hatch, there's fish out there on the worm bars looking for worms, and you can smack them that way.
Yeah, I think that's a really good theory, especially at the beginning of the bait migration. I think there's fish that are waiting for those mullet to come down, or eager for them to come down. So you'll get a lot of strikes and a lot of aggressive fish, before it actually gets there.
Right.
Not so much at the end of the happy bait, because at the end of happy bait, the water's cooling off pretty quickly. And at that point, things are up and moving, so it's not quite as...
They're not staging.
Yeah.
Probably fat and happy.
They're fat and happy, and they're getting out of Dodge. There's a time where they say, okay, we're out of here. And then everything, the snooks, the tarpon, everything starts really, taking off. And, to be able to get them to slow down and eat, not so much. But at the beginning, very much true. I think I've caught, a lot more... or get a lot more bites, at the beginning of September before the real bait migration actually gets there, But yeah.
How often do you learn new stuff?
A lot more often than people would think.
And what's the last thing that came to your attention that's new and different and that works?
Well, there's things that I thought worked that I don't believe in so much anymore. And that happens to me more often than I find something new. Like, for instance, for years, I really tried to keep my leader size very small. Would go all the way down to 30 and 40 pound test, even though the fish were 80, 90, 100 pounds.
But they were chewing through that pretty good because the bait is swallowed.
Correct. And for me, it's easy for me to swallow, but for my clients, not so much.
Right.
You know what I mean? So what I find myself doing is, okay, well, I'll start putting on 60 and 80. I'm like, I just won't get as many bites. Not really. Every once in a while, okay, but the majority of the time, I'm getting the same amount of bites using 60 and 80 pound leader as when I was scaling it way down. I think I was way overthinking things.
Right.
And I think that's if anything that I've learned new.
That's it.
Is that it? Quit thinking.
It's interesting because you will not get that with a fly. With clear water tarpon migration in the Keys, they see way too well. The fly's above them. Mm-hmm. They start swimming, especially if you've got some sort of especially with the worm fly and the new worm techniques where you're trying to cross them a little bit, they're going to see that heavier, shock. But with the bait, with the mullet that's swimming, they know it's an animal that they want to eat. And I can't imagine, especially with some of the tannic water that you have on the inside, that the 80 versus 40 pound shock is going to make any difference.
That, and I think the bigger leader impedes the bait just a little bit, makes it kind of
slows it down,
makes it where maybe they wouldn't eat a regular bait going by, but because this thing's huffing along, dragging 80 pound with it,
right?
That it might trigger them. I mean, it's, you have no clue what those fish are actually thinking, but that's what I'm thinking. And maybe that's why it's working.
What's closer to your heart, a 35-pound snook or a 120-pound tarpon?
35-pound snook.
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, 35-pound snook, because fishing for 30 and 40-pound snooks, I would do that by myself anytime that I had a day off. You know what I mean? I would just sit there and do it, knowing that if I didn't catch one, I can go home and be perfectly happy with that. You know what I mean? Not so much with tarpon. With tarpon, I know those fish are there, and if I don't catch one, it irritates the piss out of me, and I'm not really enjoying it. I enjoy the piss out of it when, everything comes together and it's all working and I get all happy. But snook fishing to me is a lot different, and it has a lot more to do with me personally.
In what way?
Something spiritual about big snook fishing.
God, everyone says that. Steve Huff said that.
Yeah, his favorite fish now is a snook.
Well,
I think always was
big snook on fly.
Big snook.
Yeah,
big snook. And when we were kids, we would sit there with a case of beer, amongst other things, and we would sit there all night long, knowing that sooner or later these big snook are going to feed. And we would wait, and we would wait, and we would goof around, and we would talk, and days would go by sometimes, and you wouldn't get a strike, and you were perfectly okay with that. You would get up the next day and stay up, and do whatever you had to do until you got that big fish. And then when you got that big snook and you came home, I don't know, it was like eating a great pasta meal or something. You feel like it's like everything is great.
Yeah, you're high. You're on a high.
You're on a high.
Sounds like elk hunting to me.
Yeah. And then also, too, is that other guys aren't going to do what you just did in order to do that.
That's a special fish.
Yeah, it's a special fish.
A lot of people catch a 120-pound tarpon, but not very many people catch a 35-pound snook.
I can guide people to catch 100-pound tarpon.
Right.
I can't necessarily guide people to catch 30-pound snook. There's a certain clientele that will do it with you, usually after you fish with them for a long time, and they have the faith in you that, you're out there and every minute spent is a good minute. But that's the difference between snook and tarpon, in my opinion.
How many of those big fish will you catch in a year?
30-pound snooks?
Yeah.
Now that I'm a full-time guide and I'm doing 200.
A full-time tarpon guide?
Yeah. Not so many. I get them by accident. And I don't really fish for them the way I used to. I don't show people how to catch them the way I used to.
You want to keep that for yourself?
I don't think that the snook are in a position for that to be recreational for everybody at this point.
Do you feel like your client doesn't deserve that special fish in any way?
I think if he's just as happy catching a 12-pound Jack Crevalle, then he should be catching a 12-pound Jack Crevalle. I think that big fat mother snook that's sitting over there should be left alone. Now, if that guy catches 100 of those big Jack Crevalles and then caught 50, 100-pound tarpon with me over the course of 8 or 9 years, and Jim Hayes, who's been one of my favorite clients and probably one of the most consistent clients, he's getting up there in age, and a couple of years ago, he said, Jeff, he goes, I really want to catch one of those giant snook that you do. And I said, okay, Jim. I said, we'll do it. I said, but you do realize this isn't like tarpon fishing. You're not going to come home that night and scroll through all your pictures. So we went a couple nights and we caught some big fish, 17, 18 pounders. And then he got like a solid 40-pound snook. And I don't push mounts on my clients ever. I learned and saw a long time ago that that's a short road. And if a guy really wants to mount a fish, of course, I'll hook him up the best I can. Jim caught this fish, and it was probably right about 40 pounds. Big snook. And I looked at Jim. I said, dude, if you ever wanted to mount a fish, I go, that's the fish you should mount. And he did. And this guy's caught hundreds of tarpon with me. But the fish that he mounted and put on his wall was that giant snook. And he thanks me every time he sees me, that he did so. Because people go there and they look at that snook and they just are in awe, of this big fish. And he was at the right time in his angling experience to catch a fish like that. You know what I mean?
And what is that right time?
There's a time when you fish enough in the salt water where you can really appreciate a trophy. You know what I mean? It's one thing for a guide to put you on a trophy and you catch a trophy and you show that picture and everything. And then there's a time when he'll actually appreciate what he actually caught and actually understand what he actually caught. And getting a guy on a giant snook before he understands that, it's almost like you squander what it's really like.
It's almost like you wasted that fish on somebody who didn't appreciate it.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right word, but I understand where you're coming from.
Yeah,
it wasn't fair to the fish.
It wasn't fair to the fish, and it's not fair to some of the other clients. Like, one of the things that always drives me crazy about taking people fishing every day is you'll get some New Yorker or whatever in, and the dog track was closed that day, so he ended up booking with you. You know what I mean?
You took him jack fishing.
Well, or he'll go out and he'll catch, 5 tarpon. And then, he'll get off the boat and just, like, oh, that's what that guy does.
Right.
And not even appreciate the 5 tarpon.
How special that was.
Yeah. Right. And then you get this other kid from Colorado that's been fishing since he could walk. And he's willing to spend 10 hours on the boat with you, and the fish clam up and he gets diddly. And then you go home and you go, how the frig does that work?
It's not fair.
Right.
It's just not fair.
It's just, right?
I was watching a Meat Eater television show with Steve Arnella, and Steven was taking his buddy Giannis Putelis and his dad moose hunting up in Alaska. And his dad was getting elderly. He was probably 75 years old, and it was kind of like his big last moose hunt hurrah. They go up to Alaska, and I think the first morning or the second morning, Giannis's dad kills a monster moose. They call Steve over. Steve comes over, and he's looking at Giannis's dad, and he goes, dude, you don't deserve that. You didn't withstand the thunderstorms and the rain and the cold and the sleepless nights in the tent and the uncomfortable situations.
You killed the moose 50 yards from the tent.
You didn't deserve that.
You didn't experience enough pain.
Right.
And it was great because at the same time,
it's true.
It's very true.
Right.
Yeah.
It's funny because we talk about, we're big fans of bow hunting for elk, and we kind of do it a very hard way, backpacking in with our sleeping bags and, freeze-dried food, and we're being there hungry and, walking 15 miles at 11,000 feet for a week, and then we kill one. It takes us 4 days to get it home. And you get back to Boca and you see somebody and he shows you this 400-inch elk he killed on a private ranch at Ted Turner's place, somewhere. And it's like, it's really hard not to be bitter. It's like, no, you don't. No, that's not an elk.
But you can't say that.
You can't, and
Right,
we don't. But but I get where you're coming from because we are fishermen, and I'm just relating that to the hunting world as well.
Right. Yeah.
But Steve Rennell had said that so
Yeah,
perfectly.
he goes, you didn't deserve that. That's so true.
Yeah, and he meant that from the bottom of his heart.
Yeah.
And the poor guy that he said it to probably he didn't get it when he said that either.
But the thing is, the old guy had probably experienced 50 years of pain, so yes, he did deserve it.
Yeah. What is that like?
Yeah.
Well, that's one of the things that turned me off of the bill fishing. Because quite frankly, if you got enough dough and you're willing to spend it,
You can buy the fish.
you'll crush them in the tournaments and stuff. You know what I mean?
Get the right crew.
Get the right crew. You get a
Right
boat
boat.
that's faster than everybody else's, and you're willing to spend the money. And you spend the money to get your glory. And I watched that happen, and it became very consistent, especially in the sailfish circuits. And I saw the really good fishermen, best of the best. Ray Rocher's a good example. He has to jump off his charter style boat and captain somebody else's boat that can go 40 knots because maybe they want to run up to Stewart today and go bang out 20 fish. So Ray does that. Ray could never do that on his custom single engine
Right.
charter boat. I could never do that on my little Bertram or whatever I had. And then you watch that, and I wouldn't say bitter, but close.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And you just shake your head like that's not what it's all about.
Right.
Yeah.
It's interesting, the world of fishing. There's so many different perspectives and emotions that play out. And that's why, I love that term, stay in my own lane. Just keep my eyes on my own paper because it's hard not to be a little bit judgmental in a lot of ways.
You're out on the water all the time. It's okay to be judgmental.
You deserved it.
Yeah.
You've experienced the pain.
And you don't have to put up with anybody anyway. You're going to be out there fishing all day anyway.
I'm out. I've got to put up with Nikki. That's probably worse.
It's not like we're going
Fuck
to
off.
I'd
rather be. I'm a guide for hire. I get
right.
rid of Nikki.
I tell you,
if you want to see no fish, have zero fun, hire Andy Mill Charters.
That's what we call our boat.
Captain Zero.
Captain Zero.
I tell you what excites me about you two is you guys do stuff together. And my dad's gotten to an age where he just can't anymore. And I did stuff with him until then. And I look at you guys, and it warms my heart. It just makes me like, that's what happens. That's the way the world's supposed to go. You know what I mean?
Right.
And then I see the guys that fish that don't have that. And I'm not saying it's soulless or anything, but it's different. You know what I mean? Having their family bond.
Yeah.
Well, the people that know our friends know us, know how lucky we are to have each other because we're best friends. Mm-hmm. We all hunt together. We fish every second that we can together, and the ribbing is nonstop, obviously, and that's why we like fishing with you because there's a lot of ribbing.
Well, we're more friends than parent son.
Yeah, you know way too much. So too much that a son should know about a father.
Well, that's what happens when you spend that much time together out in the middle of nowhere trying to accomplish the same thing.
Yeah, you're a sick man.
Of course.
Steve
Steve Huff said that. He was talking about his clients. There are more things said on a skiff than there are said in a conventional.
No, that was Flip.
Yeah.
That was Flip.
That's Flip.
You guys are on a trip. No, it wasn't this famous dude. It was that famous dude.
Yeah, right.
That's funny.
This podcast has been around.
Yeah.
But
do you ever get mad? Are you mad right now in your life?
No.
For any reason?
Well, yeah, I'm pissed about the damn sewage issue we're having in Fort Lauderdale. Like, livid. And that's just... When you fish every day and you're on the water all the time, you see things different than the average Joe that's walking around. And you look at the average Joe that's walking around and you get pissed because they can't see what you see. And we've had these sewage spills in Fort Lauderdale, and it's killed millions of fish and contaminated the waterways that I grew up on. And it's kind of like an ongoing thing. And I haven't been mad and really upset in a long time. In the last few weeks, I'm sitting there trying to fall asleep, and my blood has been boiling. And to think that there's kids that are growing up right now that aren't going to have even close to the opportunity to catch fish and to enjoy the water and experience the things that people experience on the water because of lack of water quality, it's got my blood boiling. And I haven't been pissed in years, Andy. I mean, really deep down upset.
But you have a voice. Tell us about what you're doing with your voice in fighting this.
The only thing.
Well, first tell the audience what's actually happening in Broward.
Okay. Very similar to a lot of municipalities all through the state. Our infrastructure, and we're talking about our sewage infrastructure, is failing. It was put in 1970s. And it's the same infrastructure, and it hasn't been updated. And the government has taken money from the taxpayers, from the developers, from everybody that's ever wanted to do anything in Broward County. You have to pay. If you're a developer and you want to build a skyscraper, you pay what they call an impact fee. It's a lot of dough. When you have water and sewer, you pay that every single month. It says right on your bill, it's for water and sewer. And they've taken that money and basically stole it and have done other things with it and have neglected the infrastructure. And they knew this shit was happening. And they made a conscious decision not to do what they needed to do to keep the infrastructure strong.
The upgrades.
And upgrades and maintenance. And have taken that money and done a whole bunch of other things with it. And just recently we had these major sewage spills in Fort Lauderdale. I'm talking about hundreds of millions of gallons of sewage put right into the New River where I grew up fishing, where I learned 90% of what I know.
And you have videos of this?
Yeah, we have videos of it. It's public knowledge. It's all over the news. I mean, Broward County has admitted to it and knows about it and has acknowledged it. Doesn't make it any better. But you sit back and you think, you just feel like you've been scammed, and you feel like you did your part to make sure stuff like this doesn't happen, and then other people didn't do what they were supposed to do, and because of that, it just kills you. It eats you up from the inside out. So these sewage spills are nothing new. It's just that they got so dramatically huge in a short amount of time that now people that aren't on the water every day can understand, or at least see, the devastation. I've been crying about this shit forever. And what would happen normally is 20, 30,000 gallons of sewage gets spilled into a canal. They fix it in 2 days, and nobody really knows what's going on. But it happens 20, 30 times a year in Broward County. Dade County, same exact issue. Sarasota, they're having the problem. Tampa, they're having the problem. There's septic problems in other parts of the state. But these failing infrastructures are causing crazy damage in the ecosystem, in our waterways, in the ICW, the bait migrations. All this stuff is dwindling. There's a few different reasons for it. Sewage is a big part of it. But sewage is something that we can get in front of as a state. We know this shit's happening. The governments already know. This DeSantis dude that's supposed to save the friggin' world, he knows that this is going to happen to more cities. And it's going to happen in Fort Lauderdale again. It's going to happen in Miami. It's going to happen right here in Boca Raton. And if Florida can't get ahead of this and be
more proactive,
we should be the experts. We should be cutting edge technology. We should have the cleanest waters. It is the biggest priority for our state, or at least it should be the biggest priority for our state. It's the biggest priority for the people that move to the state. When people move here, they want to be on boats. They want to be at the beach. They want to surf. They want to paddleboard. They want to kayak. They don't come here to friggin', people go to New York City to make a lot of money. You can go work at Goldman Sachs. There's a million jobs you can get and make a lot of money. That's what you go to New York City for. When you come to Florida, you come here because of the water. And we're going to squander this? We're not going to get out ahead of it? And these people are supposed to be leaders? I'm 51 years old. I've seen Democrats. I've seen Republicans. I've seen them all. And every year, the water quality gets worse. Every year, the fish populations go down. And then what are we going to hear this year, being an election year? We're going to hear about people. They're going to talk about environment. They're going to talk about saving the water, this Green New Deal bullshit. Dude, take care of our sewage. Take care of our own shit. Is that like, that's not rocket science. We should expect that. And we can't. And it just infuriates me. I didn't mean to get on a roll like that, but geez, man.
But tell us also, too, about the protests that you're
And you're holding them
organizing.
accountable.
Well,
Or trying to, at least.
yeah, I mean, because it's become public knowledge and people can actually see what's going on, I thought it'd be a good idea to rally the people and actually have a demonstration where we're not holding the mayor and the commissioners, well, we're not trying to vilify them, and we're not trying to point our fingers at them and say, you son of a bitches. All we want them to do is take this as a priority. We want it to be the number one priority. Take all the other crap that's on the agenda and throw it out the window and make sewage a priority. We've paid for it. It should be a priority. What the heck else in this state is a higher priority than that? And then we want them to be able to hold them accountable. Because sure, they'll tell you, oh yeah, it's a priority, it's a priority, it's a priority. 3 months will go by. Everybody else will go back to work. Yeah, the fisherman can still see the problem because he's on the water every single day. But the guy that's going to work every single day, in the office job or wherever, going to school, you're a teacher, whatever the hell, you don't know that the fish are still dying, that the wildlife is being depleted. So this demonstration is to hold them accountable and make it our number one priority. And maybe, just maybe, with a little bit of luck, the rest of the state will see it, because it's not just a Fort Lauderdale problem. It's happening all over. And it's not just because it's giant development going on. People want to point their fingers at the developers. I mean, I'm not super happy that Fort Lauderdale is starting to look like a city, but it is, and we can't fight that. But when you go to build a house in Fort Lauderdale, you have to have the right plans. They make you put in the right foundation. They make you do all this crap in order to build a house. Well, you guys have a city to deal with, and you guys should be held to a higher standard than us. And they're not. And they steal the money, and they're never held accountable. So maybe after this protest, it'll open up some people's eyes, and maybe things will change. Am I counting on it? No. What else am I going to do? If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down screaming and kicking and fighting.
How does this affect you as a fisherman in the future of your life as a fisherman?
From a business standpoint?
No, just that, and as a personal, emotionally. I mean, every day you see this, and in the back of your mind, in a real world, this is going to be a non-ending issue.
Right. Emotionally, it's a tug of war, because this is what goes through your mind. You say, well, it's getting harder, and this isn't right. So I'm going to pick up and I'm going to leave. I'm going to go to Punta Gorda. So then what? I'm going to watch it happen in Punta Gorda?
Right.
Happen all over again?
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of like a tug of war in your mind. Like, what's the right thing to do? Where do I go from here? From a business standpoint, it's not that bad for business. The harder it gets for people to catch fish, the more the demand is going to be to have a guy like Captain Jeff that can take them out there.
It goes back to the old adage, think globally, but act locally.
I'm a strong believer in working from the inside out.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a strong believer in taking baby steps. And if you take the right small steps, then the big steps get easier and easier along the way. And I really don't think that if we put our minds to it as Floridians and we make it the number one priority, I don't think it's that difficult to do. I think we can restore the waters in Fort Lauderdale. I think Captains for Clean Waters can deal with Everglades National Park. And I think this infrastructure thing is the simplest of them all, because we just have to make sure that the infrastructures are the way they're supposed to be. Unfortunately, these infrastructures are managed by small towns. People that run small towns aren't exactly what you would call rocket scientists. There's a reason they're running There's a reason they're politicians in small towns. I would not exactly call them, the cream of the crop. But we need to get the best people in the entire world right here in Florida to figure this stuff out. And it's not that hard.
So is there a plan currently?
There's a plan to redo the sewage system and the infrastructure. And right now they say they're going to do it. There's been a plan for it. And there's been money allocated for it. And the mayor and
a
the
lot
city,
of money.
Lots of money. $250 million to be exact in the last 5 years.
Wow.
In the city meeting the other night, the first question was, what happened to the $250 million? And we got some horseshit answer, a bunch of blah, 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 averages and this, that, and the other. And then they went on to tell us that they're going to rebuild the infrastructure, this one main pipe. Well, duh! You guys are friggin' the city. That's what you guys are supposed to do the whole time. Like, that's news to us? What I want to know is, are you going to be held accountable for it next year? And what are we going to do to restore the wildlife in our small town? And those estuaries are small in Fort Lauderdale. We can do it there.
Right.
It's not like Everglades National Park where we need the friggin' a third of the state to make it happen.
Also, too, it's nice knowing that you have an incoming and a falling tide. So there's a flushing system, if you will, natural flushing system that will help. It's not like a sitting lake.
It's not like Titusville.
Yeah, or Okeechobee.
Right.
Yeah, but that water doesn't disappear.
No, I know, but it can get diluted if it gets out. And if they stop where it's coming from, you give it a period of time. Mother Nature's got a great way of healing herself.
Let me give you an example of how incompetent the government is. Do you know where they got the fish kill count from? Me. Because when the fish started dying, I went down there and took pictures. And on the shoreline, we did an average 6 to 8 fish per linear foot. They took my stats and published it all over the friggin' news. That's what they used. My stuff? We didn't have some expert.
No scientists.
Nobody.
A fisherman that cares.
Nobody even knew the number. That's why they went with mine. My numbers are simple. Look at my freaking phone. You see how many fish there are? That's about a foot. There's 6 dead fish per foot. That's where they got their information from. That's how incompetent. That's where we are as a state. We got the DEP, we got the EPA, we got OSHA, we got all these organizations. They are full of shit. They don't know nothing. FWC, pathetic. Pathetic. It kills me. And the money is spent. These people are friggin' paying for their kids to go to school. In the meantime, they don't know the fish count.
Yeah.
They get it from me.
That's quite sad.
Yeah.
It's retarded. But it's the way it is. And don't let anybody tell you it's different. We all sit back. We want the best. We want to have faith in this new governor or whatever. We want to have faith in our party. Right? Democrat, Republican. That's all a bunch of crap. Both of them have been in office, in and out, my whole life. And every year of my life, our waterways have been getting worse.
It's kind of interesting. You would think that there'd be some sort of a building moratorium down here. If you take a look at West Palm to Miami, it's insanely crowded.
A Capt.
And right now in Boca, you go around, you see all these new sky rises, all these new apartment buildings. The infrastructures you're talking about cannot handle this.
Right.
We've already got such bad water issues with the lack of fresh water getting into Florida Bay. And we see all the golf courses and the nutrients and the golf courses being drained, everywhere. You would think that, obviously, they're not thinking about the water and where all the sewage is going more so than how many more people we can put into this.
It's
all about money.
Small area.
All about the next deal.
Yeah.
This state has not been just one giant real estate deal from its infancy.
I mean, I'm from a very small town, Aspen, Colorado, and there was a period of time where there was a building moratorium. We don't have a lot of public land around Aspen. Actually, there's a lot of public land, not a lot of private land, so we're only limited to how much we can build, which is actually nice because Aspen, you have a height limit, so you can't go up like you can in cities. But in this day and age, January 2020, They're building more and more and more and more. And like you said, they're not even taking a look at the beaches and the water and what's happening to the water.
Which is the biggest lure in South Florida.
Right.
Which was the catalyst for all that construction in the first place.
You take a look at Florida Bay and the Lower Keys. They're talking about the money brought in is about $450 million a year for fishing. But the fish aren't going to be there if the water's not right. Mm-hmm. And it's a simple thing that you would think that this should be higher on their priority list.
I mean, not to be...
Well, good for you for speaking up and putting this stuff on Facebook and rallying the troops. That army that we need to fight this is built one man at a time.
And you're leading
one
it.
step at a time. And you've got the biggest platform right now in South Florida being a guide. You've got a voice. Your Instagram stuff, your podcast. I just, personally want to thank you as not only being a friend and a great fisherman, but what you're doing for the cause down there.
Well, thank you. I mean, it means a lot because, I don't know. It just, it means a lot to me. So.
We had an interview recently with Sandy Moret, and he was awarded as the Conservationist of the Year by BTT just recently because of how much he fought and got the new SB10 in place for the reservoir below Lake Okeechobee. And I asked Sandy, I said, is this possibly your greatest achievement? That too, I ask you this. If you can fight this, if you can change this issue, possibly is this your greatest hurrah?
Publicly, yeah. Publicly, for sure. If I can just help a little bit, it would be a huge win. You know what I mean? Yeah. From the public side of things.
Yeah.
There's some things that, personal things that, my daughter or my wife, and they would never come close.
Right.
But publicly, if things change, it would mean just the world to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. So where is the protest being held? So if people listen, they can...
January 12th, which is tomorrow. Mm-hmm. We're going to do it at Cooley Hammock Park, which is actually the park right in front of the old Tarpon Bend. The place where we did YouTube videos where we caught so many 100-pound fish in a row that I was able to take a guy off the seawall and let him reel one in. I don't know if you remember that video.
Yeah.
The same corner where we caught multiple 20-pound snooks. Back to back to back to backs. The same corner that I grew up learning how to snook fish on. The same corner we did the power casting videos on. The same corner that we've yelled at the water taxis at the top of our lugs on. So we're having the on-land protest there. And then we're having an on-the-water protest, which I believe will be better than a couple hundred boats. And these boats will be strung out from the sandbar in front of the New River all the way to Tarpon Bend.
Okay.
And I'm hoping because of the boat exposure that the national media will cover it, which I'm sure will happen. And hopefully from that point on, there'll be enough people in Broward County that will have the same goal as me, which is to have this priority of getting the waters cleaned up and the infrastructure done, and then the accountability and who's going to do it and when it actually is going to happen.
Well, thank you, Jeff.
Great podcast, guys. I really enjoyed it.
You're magical.
Love being around you.
Run that dog, guys.
Yeah. Thanks, bro.
Thanks, guys.
West Side Story.